Sankara's blueprint, Traoré's reality. The truth behind the new Burkina Faso. While both men seized power at a young age via coups and used anti-imperialist rhetoric, the structural foundation of their power is fundamentally different. The difference lies in how they mobilize the public versus how they currently control them. Mobilization versus militarization. The biggest difference is in the tools they use to connect with the people. Thomas Sankara established committees for the defense of the revolution, CDRs. These were neighborhood-level, civilian-led groups that weren't just for security. They ran literacy campaigns, built schools, and vaccinated millions. They gave ordinary citizens a daily, active role in the revolution. Traoré relies on volunteers for the defense of the homeland, VDPs. While these involve the public, they are almost strictly paramilitary. Instead of building schools, citizens are being handed rifles and sent to the front lines. This turns the grassroots into a militia rather than a social movement, which creates a relationship based on fear and survival rather than civic progress. The consensus versus the decree. While Sankara was the face, his government, the CNR, often debated him. There are historical records of the council overruling Sankara's own personal proposals. This created a sense of intellectual buy-in from the country's youth and intelligentsia. Traoré has significantly narrowed the circle of power by recently dissolving all political parties and reportedly surviving 5 coup attempts since 2022. His rule has become increasingly isolated. When you arrest or conscript journalists and judges who disagree with you, you lose the genuine grassroots support and replace it with performative support from those afraid of the consequences. Pan-African unifier versus regional secessionist. Sankara was a diplomat of the masses. He spoke at the UN and the OAU, now the African Union, to persuade other African leaders to join a collective debt strike. He believed in changing the system from within the African community. Traoré has led a schism. By pulling Burkina Faso out of ECOWAS and forming the Alliance of the Sahel States, AES, he has isolated the country from its West African neighbors. Critics argue that Sankara wanted to bring Africans together, whereas Traoré's strategy relies on succession and a heavy reliance on Russia, Africa Corps, Wagner, to fill the void left by his neighbors. Tangible gains versus perpetual war. Sankara's results. In just 4 years, Sankara achieved a 75% increase in cereal production, planted 10 million trees, and slashed infant mortality. The people supported him because their lives changed overnight. Traoré's struggle. Traoré is trapped in a security-first loop, with roughly 40 to 50% of the country outside of government control due to jihadist insurgencies. His progressive and popular revolution is constantly interrupted by the need for war. It is hard to maintain grassroots enthusiasm when the primary output of the government is a call for more soldiers rather than more food. I ask, can the precautions made by Traoré be understood considering the many assassination attempts made on his life? Are these precautions not reasonable? There is a sharp divide between those who see his actions as a necessary defense of sovereignty and those who view them as a slide into authoritarianism. The case for reasonable precautions. From a survival standpoint, the precautions are often viewed as a direct response to a very real and documented threat environment. Numerous assassination attempts. As of early 2026, reports indicate that Traoré has survived dozens of attempts on his life. Most recently, in January 2026, his government announced it had foiled a deadly assassination plot involving former President Paul-Henri Sandaogo Damiba and foreign backers. The Sankara president. Traoré frequently draws parallels to Thomas Sankara, the iconic Burkina leader, who was assassinated in 1987 coup. Supporters argue that Traoré's heavy security, including the use of the Wayan, civilian supporters acting as a human shield, and Russian security advisors, is the only way to prevent history from repeating itself. Infiltration risk. Given that Traoré himself came to power via a coup, he is acutely aware of how easily the military can turn. This justifies his purges of the officer corps and his reliance on a smaller, elite Praetorian Guard for personal protection. The case against excessive or counterproductive. Critics and human rights organizations argue that these precautions have crossed the line into systemic repression. Social fragmentation. The mass arming of the VDP, Volunteers for the Defense of the Homeland, has been criticized for fueling ethnic tensions. Since these militias are often less disciplined than the regular army, they have been accused of extrajudicial killings, particularly targeting the Pure community. A climate of fear. Measures intended to protect the leader have expanded to include the silencing of civil society, the use of general mobilization laws to forcibly conscript critics and journalists into frontline combat is seen by many as a misuse of state security for political survival. Strategic trade-offs. Some analysts suggest that the focus on regime security, protecting the capital and the leader, has created a vacuum in rural areas where jihadist groups continue to hold significant territory. Ultimately, whether these measures are reasonable depends on one's priority: the survival of the revolutionary state or the protection of civil liberties and social cohesion. I ask, is Russia providing immigrated African troops to the Burkina Faso front lines? The Russian military pipeline that funnels African nationals to the front line. Usage in Ukraine versus the Sahel. There is a curious distinction in how these recruits are used. Ukraine, the cannon fodder role. Records indicate that African recruits in Ukraine are often placed in low-trained, Storm Z-style units because they lack language skills and specialized training. They suffer disproportionately high casualty rates. Burkina Faso, Mali, the instructor role. In contrast, the Russians sent to the Sahel, like those supporting Traoré, are typically seasoned Russian professionals from the Africa Corps. There are very few records of immigrant recruits being sent back to Africa as Russian soldiers. Russia prefers to use its own experienced personnel for these high-stakes geopolitical missions, while using foreign recruits to fill the manpower gaps in the trenches of Ukraine. Let us continue to keep the people of Burkina Faso and the entire Sahel in our thoughts and prayers. Also, remember to like, comment, and subscribe.